Now let's move on to looking at who the Shah Waliullah Muhaddith ad-Dihlawi was. Before I start this specific presentation on the Shah Waliullah, I'd like to give some preliminary notes and pointers on what are the sort of things that we shall be brushing upon. Secondly, just a few notes on how this all began. Initially, I intended to write an essay which was titled Building a Case for Shah Waliullah Muhaddith ad-Dihlawi in Modern Britain. Building a Case for Shah Waliullah in the Modern Britain. And another essay titled Shah Sahib in Transition, based on his expositions on culture, civilization, or his specific term which he uses is al-irtifaqat. But what happened is that this essay became quite lengthy, and there were certain things or certain themes within there which I felt would have caused aggravation to certain individuals. Therefore, to invoke the famous phrase in Urdu, which is history is a sleeping tiger, don't wake it up. History is a sleeping tiger, don't wake it up. And I felt that if I give you the keys of how to approach Shah Waliullah Muhaddith ad-Dihlawi, and how that each of you could build this specific case and relate to what has happened and where we are today, then hopefully you'll be able to reach the conclusions which I have reached to. A second point which I felt throughout this essay and this presentation as well is that certain individuals will feel that I have underrepresented certain points and overrepresented other areas. To be fair, I feel that each area deserves a separate session. Secondly, in terms of history, another grievance which obviously will come out is that of subjectivity and objectivity. And for that, all I can say is, inshallah, if you look at the facts for yourselves, then you'll be able to see, to decipher the subjectivity from it. Nonetheless, let us begin. I will begin firstly by arguing that British Islam, this is for the case of building a case for Shah Waliullah in modern Britain, begin by arguing that British Islam, so to speak, is predominantly from the subcontinent or Asian. And for that I wish to quote a famous social scientist, Philip Lewis, in his book Islamic Britain, titled Islamic Britain, which is a case study on the Muslims in Bradford. And I quote, this is him: "The majority of British Muslims locally and nationally originate from South Asia. Indeed, a recent analysis concluded that as many as 80% were from South Asian backgrounds. Too often, Islam is seen as a Middle Eastern religion, and it is forgotten that the largest Muslim populations and nations are found in Asia. The significance of South Asian Islam is not simply numerical. It has either generated or profoundly shaped three of the most important Muslim traditions today: revivalism, Islamism, and modernism." So what we see here are 3 points, possibly 3 points, yes. One is that British Islam is predominantly located in South Asia, or in a South Asian context. Secondly, not only the numbers, but the influence South Asian Islam had on the rest of the Muslim world. And thirdly, he feels that the 3 most important religious orientations, revivalism, Islamism, and modernism, have its roots in the subcontinent. Let us look at Shah Waliullah now, because as we will come to see, that the impetus of all these reactions, i.e. revivalism, Islamism, and modernism, finds its origins in the personage of Shah Waliullah Muhaddith ad-Dihlawi. Firstly, to begin with, I would like to quote from a famous theologian, Shibli al-Nu'mani, in his book Ilmul Kalam, where he gives a brief synopsis of Shah Waliullah Muhaddis ad-Dihlawi. And I quote, "The intellectual decline that emerged immediately after the demise of Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Rushd. Looking at the tendencies of their societies, it seemed unlikely that another enlightened spirit and mind would emerge. However, nature wanted to impress its wonders to man. At a time when the spirit of Islam was suffocating, a man like Shah Waliullah was born, before whose penetrating rational arguments the contributions of Ghazali, Razi and Ibn Rushd fell short." Now both of these statements, the one from Philip Lewis and this one here, warrant a study of Shah Waliullah Muhaddis ad-Dihlawi. And so for that, firstly, I'd like to give you a brief introduction to his life so that things can kind of fit into picture and we can get more perspective, and then look at the specific areas or the key areas I would like to focus on, and then wrap up this presentation. Firstly, Shah Waliullah Muhaddis ad-Dihlawi was born in the 18th century, or 1703. His father was Shah Abdul Rahim, who was a courtesan in the courts of Aurangzeb Alamgir, the king, the Mughal emperor, Aurangzeb. His father, his grandfather, had a dream of the famous Sufi Qutbuddin Bakhtiyar Kaki, who was a famous Sufi, Naqshbandi Sufi, and due to which his father decided that he would name Shah Waliullah Qutbuddin. Hence his name is Qutbuddin Ahmad ibn Abdul Rahim. During his youth and his teens, he was brought up in at his father's tutelage. His father showed a keen interest not only in Sufism but also in law and in the Quran. His father was one of the main compilers of the Fatawa al-Hindiyya, or the famous legal codex, which was commissioned under the Mughal emperor Aurangzeb. It's known as Fatawa al-Alamgiri and Fatawa al-Hindiyya. Apart from that, like I mentioned, his father showed a keen interest in the Quran, which was quite anachronistic for those times, because as we shall come to see, there was a great deal of apathy within the theologians at that time to indulge themselves in the Quran and the study of the Quran, or what's known as exegesis today. Shah Waliullah mentions that his father was so well versed in the Quran that he could use any verse in the Quran and prove the doctrine of Wahdatul Wujud, or pantheism. He studied, by the age of 15, he had studied the conventional madrasa syllabus known as the Dars-e-Nizami, in which perhaps the most famous texts, other than the syntax, grammar, logic, philosophy, was Mishkat, and Al-Hidayah is a hadith, is a fiqh text. He studied parts of Al-Bukhari, Sahih Al-Bukhari, and other than that, he had adequate exposure to the literature of Ibn Arabi, the famous Sufi Ibn Arabi, Abdul Rahman Al-Jami, and Mujaddid Al-Fathani, Ahmad ibn Abdul Rahim. By the age of 15, he had graduated. He had been initiated in all the 4 Sufi schools prevalent at the time in South Asia. And by the age of 17, his father passed away, leaving him in charge of the Madrasa Rahimiyya, which his father had founded. And he was accomplished as a scholar by the age of 17. He taught for another 12 years, and in the year 1731, April 1731, roughly around that date, he left for Hajj, where he stayed in the Hijaz for about 14 months.